Joining me now, as promised, is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. There was a positive development today, as you well know. A Seventh Circuit panel affirmed a temporary restraining order that is keeping the National Guard from actually deploying in Chicago. And they said political opposition is not rebellion, which is very true and very powerful. We're also living in a world, you're living in a world where this administration is not exactly complying with every order from every court. Are you preparing for the possibility that they may not comply? And what do you do if they don't?
Well, I do want to affirm what you just said, which is we're 5-0 in the courts. We've won on the TRO about National Guard 3 times. We've won on limiting ICE twice now. In fact, this morning there was a ruling in court about limiting ICE by requiring ICE agents to wear body cameras because the court does not believe what they are reporting. ICE is reporting in court, the federal lawyers representing them anyway. And so it strikes me as very important just to recognize that so far anyway, in this regard, the courts are doing their job. We know that the administration is operating unlawfully, and the courts are, in fact, finding it unlawful. So what do we do if the administration decides not to follow these court orders? Frankly, I don't think we've seen that in U.S. history where the president of the United States doesn't listen to the courts. You saw that he tried this with Abreu Garcia a little while ago, but finally came around and did. And then, of course, they rearrested him. But I think it's important to recognize that so far, anyway, the administration has not been willing to, to essentially go against the court rulings that have come about.
You said on Sunday that you were looking at prosecuting ICE agents who violate the law. What can you tell us about that? What would that look like?
Well, we don't know yet, because let's start with the fact that the federal agents typically have federal immunity. But they're not immune from the federal government holding them accountable and responsible. And so typically there are inspectors general, there are senior officials at agencies like ICE and CBP typically that will suspend somebody who's been accused or found to have broken the law. And as they suspend them, investigate it and then determine whether that person should be punished criminally or otherwise. The problem now, of course, is that Donald Trump has fired many of the inspectors general, or he's replaced them with political appointees. And so we don't know that anybody would be held accountable at the federal level. So we're looking at all of the options at the local level with county states attorneys, with attorneys general, to go after people when they're breaking Illinois law, when they're breaking local law. And we think that they have. You know, when they're driving through an area, someone's yelling at them and they decide to simply throw a tear gas canister out of the car as they're driving through at someone who's on the side of the road. That, it seems to me, is a violation of Illinois law. And so the question is, can we hold the officers, the agents responsible when they do something like that? If it were a police officer, we could. If it was, you or me or just an average person throwing a tear gas canister out the side of a window at people, we could hold them responsible. So it seems like they ought to be held responsible for breaking local and state laws.
It's a test of that, and you're put on the front, very much on the front lines of that. Let me ask you about something that's related but slightly different. I mean, you appear to be, I guess a way to put it is, under the skin of Trump's anti-migrant czar, Stephen Miller. He called you a moron who hates America. You mentioned him a few times today, too, saying he has abused the fact that Donald Trump has diminished capacity. You brought him up a couple of times, which was interesting. But what did you mean by that?
Well, I very plainly, it's clear that Donald Trump has diminished capacity, which I think is sad, that the people around him are not getting him help, and instead they're just taking advantage of him. And that's what Stephen Miller is. You can tell, his rhetoric is so out of bounds. And then we know that he's the one who is advising Kristi Noem at DHS. He's the one who's advising Tom Homan, who's the kind of immigration czar, deportation czar. And of course, he's the spokesperson for this entire endeavor, including about deploying National Guard into cities. So, I mean, seems like a dangerous individual, and he has the power of the presidency because the president isn't reining him in. And so that's why I'm talking about Stephen Miller. I think that we should focus on his actions. And let's remember, and I've said this for some time, you know, they're not always going to be in office, but they will, other than the president, who's now been given immunity by the Supreme Court. The people who serve for the president, including all the way down to ICE agents, can be held accountable when there's a change of administration who's willing to hold them accountable when they break the law. Now, Stephen Miller is clearly ordering people to break the law. So, you know, he should know that, yeah, it may be 3 years from now that he is held accountable, but make sure, I think it's important for them to know that whatever they do now, it's not like we're going to forget, and it's not like we don't have a record of what they're doing. So that is why I mentioned Stephen Miller. That's why I mentioned other people, Tom Homan and Gregory Bovino, who's the CBP leader on the ground, the one who executed their orders in Los Angeles, which was, I mean, they did an awful job in Los Angeles and created all kinds of mayhem on the ground. Now he's doing it in Chicago. And so all these people need to recognize that, you know, you may have immunity because Donald Trump's willing to pardon anybody that's carrying out his unlawful orders, but you're not going to have it under another administration.
Hakeem Jeffries told me something similar when I spoke to him last week. Before I let you go, I had to ask you about this story. When I saw it, I thought, I wonder what Governor Pritzker thinks about this. I'm going to ask you about it. I mean, Politico released leaked texts from a group chat. I'm sure you saw this, of a young Republicans group that included completely vile anti-Semitism, praise for Hitler. I mean, calls to put political opponents in gas chambers. The members were ages 18 to 40. One works in the Trump administration. One's a state senator. The 41-year-old vice president has brushed this all off as what kids do. You're one of the most prominent Jewish politicians in the country. What's your message to the vice president?
Well, he's become such a sycophant for this president that he's unwilling to condemn these kinds of remarks. Remember, this is the man who just a few years ago, before he got chosen U.S. Senator, a Republican U.S. Senator, before he got chosen for vice president, just a few years ago, this is someone who called Donald Trump America's Hitler. That's a long way to go when he's now backing up the idea that people who are clearly speaking like Nazis in their texts, young Republicans, he's unwilling to say anything about that. It strikes me as, I mean, it's not just that he's, doing Donald Trump's bidding. It's that, he's just become a lackey for this authoritarian endeavor of turning this country into something other than a constitutional republic. So I think it's dangerous. I mean, he's demonstrating the danger, and it's clear that every level of this administration is corrupt, and that's what he's demonstrating.
Governor J.B. Pritzker, thank you for joining me on a very busy day. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jen.